It is a truth universally acknowledged that when one part of your life starts going okay, another falls spectacularly to pieces. Bridget Jones. Hello, I'm Kennedy Weibel,
And I'm Rebecca Capone.
and this is Reading Pop Classics, the podcast where we look at modern classic novels, read through them, discuss them, find their themes, what makes them tick, and do they still hold up? Today we are talking about Bridget Jones's Diary, the 1996 bestseller, which spawned three sequels, three movies with a fourth one on the way, and put Bridget Jones into a pantheon with classic literary characters. She is considered one of England's like premier character exports. The book has been translated into, I think, something like, or has been a bestseller in something like 40 countries, and made Helen Fielding a household name. Rebecca, start us off. Does this pass the Bechdel test?
It does. It does handily pass the Bechdel test.
Yeah.
Bridget has conversations with the initial conversation with her mother is about her upcoming Christmas gift, a conversation they're having around July or August. Um, and they talk about the Alconberry's turkey curry buffet, and then multiple conversations kind of throughout the book, not only with her mom, but with Jude and Shazzer or Sharon, her friends. They talk about Zen. They talk about culture at one of the parties. She has a conversation about the grasshopper who sang all summer with her mom. So while this is sort of a rom-comish, there's a lot of man and relationship focus in this book. It does still pass the Bechdel test, and I'll talk a little bit more about some of the women's issues and stuff that I think this book kind of brings up as we delve deeper into the book.
One of the strengths of this book is the fact that it is a rom-com. It is primarily like about being single in your 30s. That is one of Bridget Jones's preoccupations, and it's a but the fact that like it does still, there's conversations that are not about that. There are plot lines that are not about that. The life that Bridget Jones leads is not entirely consumed by that, even though it is the major plot point of the book, which makes this a really fun read. And I get why this was such a phenomenon, and why Bridget Jones is still held up as this incredible comic creation all these years later. Um, she's really fun to be with. Like, she's fun to read about. Like, it's fun to read things in her voice.
It is really fun to read things in her voice. A strength in the writing, I think, is that it does have the diary feel. Like the way the sentences are structured. She's not always using I. It's not always these like what we would consider like full or proper sentences. And like, why would it be? Like if you're writing to your diary or you're just kind of writing things down for yourself. And she's really funny. She takes this really, comedic look at her life and the things that are going on. So it's not like she's not taking her life seriously, but she does kind of like take this step back and look at herself and the things that are going on with a comedic eye, which I do think is a way that we get through. I think it's a way we get through life in general, but particularly when bad things are going on. And again, we'll talk more about this, but as a for instance, her parents separate in the course of the book,
Yeah.
and her mom starts going out um, with a strange man that she has met in Portugal,
With
Julio,
Julio. Yeah.
and the tax man.
The Taxman does not figure as prominently into the plot, in my opinion, as Julio
No,
does. Like,
Julio's a
Julio
Julio's
was
a
like,
real standout.
yeah, comes crashing back in the last act too.
He's a real standout. And her mom, I think, is a really great character in this book. I think the mother-daughter relationship is a really fun and interesting one because I do feel that the majority of women do have this testy or ridiculous relationship with their mother while simultaneously embodying, things that, I mean, you learn how.
Her mom's the other villain in this story. Like, I've only seen the movie before, and I've seen the movie multiple times, and I know that the mother side plot is like in the movie as well, that she like leaves her dad and she's dating the guy who's a home shopping network or a home shopping channel presenter. But this was the first time I'd read the book, and the plot line there is far different than it is in the movie. Her mom's kind of a, I mean, she's a fantastic character. She's super fun to have coming in out of the book, but she is sort of the other villain besides Daniel Cleaver. And
Absolutely, but I think she captures I think their relationship captures something that is pretty typical between
I
like
think
is
that's
very typical, I think, between moms and daughters, and that your mom is, moms I think sometimes look at it as like, oh, but like I want the best for you. I want you to look your best and to do your best, but they do that by by insulting you or by passing judgment on your life choices or where your life is, or maybe making you not feel great about yourself or your status as as your status as a single person, your status of being someone who doesn't have children yet, and things like that. So um I think that is a feminine that's culturally kind of feminine. I think sometimes these relationships between moms and daughters, and this is obviously sort of a buffoonish and comic exaggeration.
it is. But I think you're right. I mean, I think that's something that is a very common relationship that mothers have with their daughters, that daughters have with their moms. And I think it also works really well. I think it's represented really well in this book. I think we saw it not in literature, but in the movie Lady Bird. I don't know if you caught that one with
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I did see it.
I highly recommend it to anyone who hasn't seen it. I thought it was really good. But the relationship between I can't remember what Lady Bird's real name in the movie is, but the character that Saoirse Ronan, I also can't say that actress's real name.
I think it's Shearsay.
Okay. The young lady who plays Lady Bird and her mom, who is Jackie from Roseanne, which is how I
Yes.
know these people. But their relationship within that movie, I bears a I is sort of an echo or like I would say a cousin to the mother-daughter relationship in this one. Like it is the relationship itself is like a little bit weighted and confrontational, but the way the movie is looking at it, you do still see like what's funny about it and what is touching and sweet about it at the same time. And I will say, Bridget's mom, I'm calling her the villain in this, and I stand by that. Her behavior is sort of reprehensible throughout, but
Yes, it is 100%. I don't think that you're inaccurate in calling her a villain, because I do, like I said, I mean it is this like this comic um it is this comic hyperbolic play on what goes on between mothers and daughters, but I mean the hyperbolity of it is, I mean, yes, it does make her a villain.
but she also gets off, I mean, a really, I think, poignant line about why she is maybe not why she's doing this. It is not her pure motivation, but she's talking to Bridget about how unfulfilled she feels in the life that has been handed to her, a life that she is still trying to push onto Bridget without realizing that like Bridget can see what's falling apart directly in front of her. And at the same time, this woman's like, why don't you have anyone with you yet? Why didn't you get married younger? While she is experiencing her own unhappiness, or while she is demonstrating the long tail effects of her own unhappiness in that same situation. But that aside, she makes the comment that when Bridget's father, her husband, retired, like that's it. It's like my life's work is done. And the way she felt was that like mine just has to keep going on, washing up after him and taking care of the house and like making sure he's got like snacks in the fridge and all this. And she says that it's kind of the same way I felt when you guys would get out of school for the weekends. And I don't know, that rang really true for me. The sort of just like, that's how kids do it also, right? Just like I'm done for the week. Mom, where's dinner? Like mom, where's breakfast? Like mom, where's like I don't know. I thought that was a really well observed thing to place into the mother's mouth and the mother's point of view, the character's mouth, of course, and point of view in this, that like everyone else just gets to be finished when they're finished. And like my job is just, I don't know, eternal. I'm just here always doing this. Like I'm done.
Yes, and I think this kind of segues nicely into some something that I think is interesting in this book, and because you brought up comparing the relationship between Bridget and her mother with Lady Bird. So this book came out in 1996, and it is about a woman who is in her 30s. So she'd have been born in the 60s, and Lady Bird is obviously a much more modern movie that has come out, in the 2000s, and was about a teenager. So somebody from a vastly different generation, and then therefore being raised by somebody from a vastly different generation. Like Bridget Jones could be Lady Bird's mother. And so something that I think is interesting um, is that so some of these like female issues or something or challenges to being a woman that are brought up in the book that we can kind of talk about through the course of our podcast um, that are presented in this book. Some of those things hold true today, and some of those things are looked at very differently today. But I think this is a really great example that women from Bridget's mom's generation, and this is something I've kind of seen over the years. I think that women from Bridget's mother's generation were not. It was not necessarily a choice. You sort of got married and had a kid, and that's what women did. And not that some women didn't work or that they didn't push for that or they didn't push for more, but primarily that was kind of what your role was, and that was what your mother raised you to do, and that's how you spent your life. And that's something that Bridget's mom is lamenting in this conversation. I call it the grasshopper who sang all summer conversation. Um, and Bridget is, I think, in the precipice. I think she is in that generation where women are starting to be like, is this something that I have to do? They're coming from a generation where like maybe some of them that are getting married and having kids are working full time, and that's something that's becoming more prominent for women to do like during this time, right? Or that they have to do for that matter, to help support families. And I think
Bridget
that this
does, I
is the
will say,
generation.
Bridget does want that though, right?
She wants to be in a relationship. It doesn't say much about whether or not she wants children. I feel like she wavers on that a little bit. There's not a ton of commentary on that. The focus does seem to be more
There are comments that she makes that
single versus
are
being in a relationship.
she wants to be in a relationship, and she makes several adoring comments about children, like about the idea of them. She doesn't come right out and say she like can't wait to have kids, but she does seem taken with the idea of
She
children.
does. Yes, it does seem like that, like that's part of that for her. But I think this is a generation of women realizing that that's just not it, right? Like the way her mom is feeling is like, oh, this is what I do, this is who I am, this is all I have. And I think for women at this time, it's like, do you have to get married right away? Can you spend some time being single, having fun, having a job? Can I also work and go and can I also work? Um, her friend Magda and Jeremy go through they're going through some trials and tribulations with their marriage in this book, and there's a conversation. Um,
Jeremy goes out with a younger woman.
he's flirting with a younger woman. And so she's having a conversation about the challenges of being home and being a mom all day, and how Jeremy seems to think. So she has a conversation that's the same thing that Bridget's mom is talking about earlier on in the Grasshopper Who Sang All Summer conversation. Um, and she's saying, I know Jeremy thinks my life is just one big holiday, but basically it's extremely hard work looking after a toddler and a baby all day, and it doesn't stop. When he comes home at the end of the day, he wants to put his feet up and be nurtured, and as I imagine all the time now, fantasize about girls in leotards at the Harbor Club. And then she goes on to say, I had a proper job before. I know for a fact it's much more fun going out to work, getting all dressed up, flirting in the office, and having nice lunches than going to the bloody supermarket and picking Harry up from playgroup. But there's always this aggrieved air that I'm some sort of ghastly Harvey Nichols obsessed lady who lunches while he earns all the money. So we're seeing that echoed in another generation. So something that I think that this book is about, I think one of the reasons that this book is written is to highlight some of these things for women. And again, I think this is a generation where that is starting to change a little bit, that like that's kind of our only option. And that's what's being pushed by like the parents of this generation. This generation is creating a little bit of change that I think we see more prominently now.
You think that what she's saying, did that used to be true? Did people enjoy work? Was work more fun than raising kids at some point legitimately? Like, was
I
it
have had
pre-apps,
I have had
pre-smartphones?
conversations I have had conversations with women that have children that th- there are pluses and minuses. I think a conversation that is a little more prominent now is some of the difficulties that women who stay home feel like they're sort of punished for staying home. and that women who go to work feel like they're punished for going to work and leaving their children. So I feel like maybe that's like sort of in the conversation now for a lot of women.
I legitimately wonder if work just used to be less of a drag. I mean, I also believe what you're saying about the women. I'm sorry, I'm not disagreeing. I was just struck, but
I mean, I think it depends on your job.
did jobs just used to be better when you didn't like have to be when the internet didn't allow you to do a million things, so therefore a
Well,
million things could not be done?
two
Like,
things.
did work just used to suck less for everybody? Is that
Two
possible?
two things. One, when you I've never stayed at home with a child all of the time, so this is not a personal this is not a personal opinion, but something I've heard from friends is like about going to work is like, yeah, I get to go like talk to other I get to go talk to other adults. I don't have to clean them up. They're not always, they're not always like demanding things for me. I get to like dress nice and go speak to other adults all day and talk about something that isn't what my kid's eating and whether or not he's pooped and if he wants to watch Miss Rachel, right? Like it's just it's another setting. The second thing I will bring up is that working nobody has the American work culture that Americans do, where we live to work and most of the rest of the world works to live,
That's
right?
true. They're in England. Maybe, yep. Nope, you're right.
And I mean, frankly, I also think it depends on how much you liked working and how much you like your job and what your job meant to you, that whether or not it's better to not better, but like whether or not you want to go back to that.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I think for some women, it's like if you had a job that you liked with people that you liked, and it's a job that like you're good at and you enjoy, and you get a lot of like professional confidence and stuff out of your job, then it's like, yeah, I get to go back to work where I'm something. I get to go back to work where I'm like respected and I use my brain in a different way, and I'm not just somebody's mom. And when I'm home, I'm somebody's mom and I have to do the laundry and all the meals are on me. And also, why does everybody leave their socks all over the house? And I'm the only one who picks up the socks or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? So, um, but I think that this is a generation where that starts to change because I feel like for younger people, I don't know how much of this push there is for. I grew when I was in my 20s, there was a little bit of this like, why aren't you dating? Why aren't you with somebody? Why aren't you in a serious relationship? But not the way I think women in this generation experienced it. And I don't know that that is such a thing now. Like I feel like like our millennial generation is getting they're
No,
getting married later,
I
they're
think it was
having
new in
kids
the
later.
90s. You're right. I mean, I was in high school. I was not going through it, but I mean, I was old enough to like remember media and remember like the news and remember how things were presented at that time. And it was this is very much this is true to its era. That was still a thing. I remember that there was still this like leftover, like not leftover, but there was still this like women in the workplace, like articles, like legitimate articles about like they're starting to climb the corporate ladder. And looking back on it now from 2024, and while I know that there are still issues with that, it seems like knowing that I was there for it seems wild that like, sorry, do you guys really just think women couldn't like, I don't know, push the keys on this keyboard? Like, what did you think they couldn't do? Like, why was the nation still shocked about this? But I guess it
Because
just
there was a
wasn't.
push that we were home
Yeah,
and that our work was in the home and your
yeah.
work is to get married and have children. And that's what Bridget's mom is experiencing. We see that being repeated a little bit with her friend Magda. Um, and I mean, well, and I think something in our generation now is choice, right? So you can you can choose to stay home, and that is very valid, and that is very valid work. I mean, Magda says it like it's a lot of work and it's constant and it's ongoing. If your kid wakes up in the middle of the night, you're not like off work. It's not like, oh, I'm off work hours, just stay in your bed, right? Like
That's also, I mean, everything you're saying is correct. As far as Magda goes, though, let's remember that in this same conversation, a few minutes later, she tries to have Bridget meet her for like 100 pound lunch, like the next day on no notice because she doesn't
to
realize.
go shopping and it's like a Tuesday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Magda is a little bit, Magda might not be wrong, but Magda is an upper class person who's got plenty of time on her hands. Like she is not
Yeah,
in
and I think,
she's
but
not
I
in the
think
council flat out in Puddinghamshire, Worcestershire, wherever these people live in England, like putting socks through a wringer because no one can afford a dryer and the power's out. Like she's an upper class person living in London. She's fine. Like,
it's true. It's true. And but I think that's part of the humor of the novel is that she has this point, is that she makes, and that's something I like about it. You know, Bridget is this quote unquote typical woman. She has her friend Sharon who has all of these, you know, has all of these like feminist ideas and this like feminist agenda. And Bridget is this like really amazing example, I think, of being caught in between that. And some of that is, and some of that is societal things. It's like, you know, every time she speaks to her mother, every time she's with her mother's friends, all they can talk about is her relationships and whether or not she's dating anybody. She's out with her friend who's like, you don't need that shit. Men are the worst. Like, let's be feminist, let's be independent. And she's caught in between these things, which I think is a really
no, her friend Jude, who is a little more what is it? Jude is into feng shui and like I there's some other thing. I can't remember if it was something horoscope based. All this stuff that Shazar doesn't believe in, that Sharon doesn't believe in. But
right.
Bridget is very open-minded, I should say, about both. Bridget does not hold judgmental opinions about really any of the things she's presented with throughout the book. Like she doesn't, she and she muses on them. She hears them and talks about them, but like she takes all of Sharon's stuff seriously into heart and legitimately thinks about it and how it might impact her life. She believes Jude too. She tries feng shui. She tries the other. Remember, Jude keeps telling her like, but don't bring it up with Sharon because she thinks it's bollocks because she
Yeah.
doesn't want to be embarrassed. But and Bridget doesn't. She's a good friend, but she believes all these things and tries them also. She's very open-minded. She is a very non-judgmental person generally, in contrast to Ephemeru from our last book, I should say. And also a little bit in contrast to the Bridget in the movie. So I've seen the movie. Some of the differences, just the absolute lack of Mark Darcy in the entire first almost two-thirds of the book. In the movie, there is an
Yes.
ongoing tension between Bridget and Mark. She hates him. She hates him. She hates him. She hates him. There's an ongoing tension between Daniel Cleaver and Mark. There's a lie that Daniel tells about like this terrible thing Mark Darcy has done to him that turns out to be a lie. And it turns out not only is it a lie, but Daniel himself is the one who actually did this horrible thing. I don't know why I'm saying it like it's a spoiler. Daniel says that Mark slept with his fiance, and then it turns out that Daniel slept with Mark's fiance, which is also different in the book because it was Mark's wife. But there is no tension between Mark and Daniel. They're not on the page together at any point. They don't meet in the book. They don't have a fight and go through a plate glass window.
No, 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 they don't.
Bridget Jones
The
also does not hate Mark Darcy. She finds every older person in her life trying to set her up with Mark Darcy annoying, but Mark Darcy himself is not someone she like thinks about much or like she doesn't have she thinks he's a little bit of a goon because of his sweater. That's the worst she thinks of him. He's not really in the book until almost the last third. I
the
mean, he pops up in
movie,
Act Two.
the book and the movie kind of play on different parts. Okay, so something we haven't talked about yet is that I mean I think we mentioned it in our last podcast, but something we haven't talked about just now is that this is meant to be a little play, a little modern play on Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, it's loosely based on
So
the
some of
setup.
the
And they talk about Pride and Prejudice, which was on at the time and a phenomenon in England.
right, the one with
Well,
Colin Firth
yes, and when
is
Helen
like the
Fielding,
one she's yeah, there everybody's excited to watch it come out on BBC,
yeah,
which
and
in
I've
my
seen
opinion is the superior version of Pride and Prejudice.
it is. And I've also seen that, and I have also not read Pride and Prejudice, but only seen the televised version. And Perpetua and Natasha from this book would I know have an absolute like gas attack over that. But I, like Bridget, I was all about the miniseries, didn't read the book.
No, the miniseries is wonderful. The book and the movie, the book and the movie take different parts of Pride. They mix up different parts of Pride and Prejudice, basically. Like I've kind of listed some of the like very overt Pride and Prejudice references in this book. Um,
I mean, well, tell me, do you want to list them?
I can list some of them.
Yeah, tell me what they are.
So then I was going to say is that in the movie, in the movie that's a little different. There are also callbacks, but they mix them up a little differently. So like for instance, Darcy is a bit more prominent
Yeah.
um in the first parts of Pride and Prejudice. I mean, he's more peppered throughout it. Um, he's more peppered throughout it, and there are interactions between Darcy and who's our villain? Why can't I think of his name?
Shilling Hamsworth Firth batch. That's a guess. That's a very common British name, I
No,
assume.
it'll no like Nigel. No, it'll come to me. Our bad guy in Pride and Prejudice. It'll come to me. But anyways, they are. I mean, they're at some of the same parties and stuff. There are a couple interactions between them in Pride and Prejudice, and so there are a few in the movie. So they kind of change up their Pride and I wouldn't say that one maybe follows more closely than the other, but their references are a little bit different, and I think those are some of the differences you're seeing, at least in terms of our two male protagonists,
It's interesting to know the
antagonists.
movie and to now know it's a fantastic adaptation of like reading this book. They did a great job adapting something that's a little loose. It doesn't have a great film structure inherently within it. They did a Richard Curtis, Helen Fielding, and whoever the other writer was did a great job adapting it and keeping so much of the like sort of vibe of the book in the movie
Mm.
into, or I'm sorry, the vibe of the book into the movie while combining certain like scenes from the book to like just get it all done in one scene. It was interesting like reading this having only known the film. But tell me the Pride and Prejudice parts.
Oh, sorry. So Mr. Wickham.
Oh, Mr. Wickham.
I had I
Okay.
had to look it up. It was going to bother me.
It was close.
Um, yeah, he's a rake. Yeah, he's a rake. Um, so immediately, so short, so very, very shortly into the novel, we have the reference. This is page 12. This was going to be one of my quotes, so know that. So she's at the turkey curry buffet. That's how they say it in the movie. I like that, turkey curry buffet. Um, and she sees Darcy on his own, and he's standing and like looking at books or something. He's not talking to anyone else in the room before she's introduced to him. She says, "It struck me as pretty ridiculous to be called Mr. Darcy and to stand on your own looking snooty at a party." Um, and that's
Back.
funny because so in the in the Pride and Prejudice, the first time she meets Darcy, he's brought to one of the balls that's meant for for these young men and women to meet and date each other, and he is kind of standing around on his own looking like above everything, and everyone at the party is kind of talking about like what a snob he is. Like he's just very blatantly looking down on everybody. So everybody thinks he's this kind of snobbish oaf, and then someone asks him to dance with Elizabeth, and he makes kind of a negative comment. Someone's just kind of trying to get him to like participate, one of his friends trying to get him essentially to appear less as a snob, and then he says something really snobby, um and offends her. And so then we kind of see that when they have this sort of not bad conversation, but just sort of this like awkward conversation, I guess, in their first meeting. And so she does feel a little bit like rejected by him. Um, so that is one of our callbacks. And page one, and some of these are not like a reach, but I mean some of these are just kind of looser references. So um later in the book, so Mark is having a Ruby wedding anniversary for his parents. And she has to RSVP. And so she has this like series. She's trying to like write out
Yeah.
what she's going to say. And so it's these very fancy things. Bridget Jones regrets that she will be unable, dot, dot, dot. Bridget Jones is distraught that she will be unable. Devastated does not do justice to the feelings of Miss Bridget Jones. And then my favorite one is It is with great regret that we must announce that so great was was Miss Bridget Jones's distress at not being able to accept the kind invitation of Mr. Mark Darcy that she has offed herself, and will therefore, more certainly than ever now, be unable to accept Mr. Mark Darcy's kind dot dot dot.
I thought that was very funny. I also, there's a difference there between, so I have the British version of this book and you have the
Mhm.
American version. Because in mine, it says she has topped herself, which is their way of saying offed
Oft.
herself. Yeah.
Um,
With another one in
I have
mine.
two more. I have two more. So in these, and again, these are more like some sort of like overt like
Oh, hit me. Let's do them.
writing references. I mean, obviously there are some things that track throughout the book other than these. When we're talking about Mark Darcy's house, so she says, I had shock on arrival at the party, as Mark Darcy's house was not a thin white terraced house on Portland Road or similar, as had anticipated, but a huge detached wedding cake style mansion on the other side of Holland Park Avenue, surrounded by greenery. Um, so that reference, so Darcy's house in Pride and Prejudice is he has this like amazing acreage and this really beautiful house, and it's something that he's like very well known for. So when people are visiting like his part of the English countryside, like they want to go and like see the house because it's so impressive. It's just one of the things that makes him sort of like stand out among like the gentry in the book, is this very impressive estate, this very impressive manor. And it's part of why everybody wants to be married to him, or that they want him married off so badly. And he lives there with his sister, so that she gets there, and it's this grand house that she goes to and runs into him and realizes that he's there. And then the last reference that I had kind of marked, again, one of the more overt references that I had marked, is at that party they have a conversation in the garden. Bridget steps out just to smoke a cigarette. Um, she thinks he's with Natasha because Natasha's at the party. So she goes out to smoke a cigarette, and she's this young man, is out there and kind of approaches her, asks her to dance, and then Mark comes out and they have a conversation. And he's trying to be nice to her, and he keeps asking her like if she's read any good books, and it turns out that it's because Una Alconberry told him that she was like a literary whiz and all she does is
Yeah.
read, and that's why he keeps asking her about books. I'll make a little aside here. I have a funny reference that like throughout the book, she keeps saying that she's gonna like sit down and read The Famished Road.
Yeah.
And by the very end of the book, she's still trying to read it. Like she
Yeah.
never finishes it.
No, but
Um,
when she doesn't think she's been invited to any Christmas parties, she's like, maybe I'll finally finish The Famished Road.
yeah, and it comes up like three or four times throughout the
Yeah.
book. And then like towards the very end, I think like around New Year's, it's like, oh, I'm just gonna sit in with my bath and read The Famished Road. And then it obviously doesn't, something happens, and she again continues to not. Well, let me just finish this one really quick. So eventually he asks her out. So he finally asks her out for dinner and makes it apparent that he likes her. Um, and it reminds me of so in Pride and Prejudice, Darcy comes to Elizabeth and proposes to her. Um, this is not the end of the book. He comes and proposes to her, but he goes about it in like a really boorish manner, to use an English expression, that it's kind of like, yeah, I didn't really like you. I didn't really like you in the beginning, and I don't remember exactly how he phrases it, but it's essentially along the lines of like, I kind of know that I'm too good for you and that I'd be marrying beneath me, and that's what I was registering like when I first met you, but like despite all of that, I really love you and I want to marry you. And she very rightfully is sort of like, yeah, how about not? And she turns down his proposal. Um, and the book transpires from there. And he goes on to explain a little bit of his behavior with her. Furthermore, when he comes out and um he comes out and he's kind of snotty to like the young man that's dancing with her. Like he kind of he kind of embarrasses her, and he flubs a little bit the asking her out. And so it reminds me of that when he comes in to propose to her. She also thinks when he comes to propose to her that he has ruined her sister had a prospect in marrying a friend of Darcy's, and the guy just loses interest all of a sudden, despite the fact that they have this great chemistry. And it turns out that Mark has kind of warned him against marrying one of the Bennett girls, and so she's holding that against him as well.
Well, yeah, she should.
as she should. But it comes back that there are reasons, everything is explained, and they both overcome their pride and their prejudice against the pridefulness, and they get together. And it is really a delightful book. And those are some of the references. So tell me some of the ones that you clocked in this book.
Um, I've not read the book, but I do remember the miniseries, and I know some of the ones that you mentioned there from the miniseries. And the one that most stood out to me because I'm shallow, I guess, is the scene where she comes to that beautiful house and Mark Darcy is swimming naked in his pond, and then he
Hmm.
comes walking up the hill, like wet in his like shirt and I don't know, breeches, whatever they wore back then. And she's like all aflutter, like
Hmm.
seeing him that way. And in this book, it's at the end when Julio bursts through the French doors, but then Mark Darcy has been running him down. And Mark Darcy appears in the French doors,
Oh,
like
and he's all, yeah,
sweaty and wet, disheveled and dirty. And she just writes in italics, ding dong.
yeah,
Like it's like a thing goes off inside of her. Like that was the one that
ding dong.
yeah, the the smutty one is the one that I noticed.
Yeah. And then of course the maybe one of the largest references is so Daniel Cleaver is meant
I mean,
to
the
represent
guy's
Wickham.
name is Darcy. Also, we should just so everyone knows we're not obtuse. The fact that his name is Darcy is.
Well, surely the fact that his name is Darcy, Daniel Cleaver is meant to represent Mr. Wickham. So Mr. Wickham is a really charming man who is in this social circle in Pride and Prejudice. Um, and Darcy and the Bennett girls, the Bennett sisters, really Elizabeth Bennett and her sisters, and they enjoy him. They have a nice relationship with him. Um, but Darcy doesn't like him and makes it apparent to Elizabeth. But Elizabeth, because she has not had pleasant interactions with Darcy, doesn't believe him. And Wickham's kind of playing up like, oh, he did me dirty, he did me wrong. And comes up with this backstory that they have together, that Darcy essentially like cheats him out of like money and property that he was owed. Um, but the real story is that so Wickham is like is a gambler. He has a lot of debts. He like romanticizes Darcy's little sister, a young little sister. Kind of like romanticizes her and tries to run off with her and marry her. And
I remember
Darcy
from the
for the money, and
yeah.
Darcy figures it out, but it would have ruined her, it would have ruined all of her marriage prospects, it would have ruined her like for society, right? That's not how things were done then. There's no, you're not running off and eloping because you love each other so much, that's it's not the look. um and that's why Darcy has, and there are some other things, right? And that's why things have transpired financially between him and Darcy. And so those are, it's one of the things she figures out, just
Which is
like here,
closer to how it goes down in the movie Bridget
the
Jones than
Bridget,
in
right.
the
And so here it's, that Bridget figures out, that he's like, no, like, yeah, this guy slept with my wife. So like I hate this guy. And they also have a backstory. They'd gone to they're at Cambridge together.
yeah.
Um,
Let's talk about Daniel Cleaver for a minute
let's talk
because
about Daniel Cleaver.
I one of the things that makes Bridget's character work so well and that you like her so much and that you think of her as like I don't think she's an idiot like throughout the whole book. Like I know she is like self-deprecating and she herself is telling us some of her buffoonish moments, but she's not dumb. And I think one of the things that works for that is the first time she goes out with Daniel and he's been flirting with her and they go back to his place and he's like, this isn't going to be a real thing, by the way. And she gets mad and storms out.
Hmm.
Like sets the scene for us as the reader that like this isn't like a nitwit head over heels, like giggle bush can't figure herself out character. Like she's got integrity and like a sense of self-esteem and like respect for herself from the beginning. That's on like, I don't know, page 30 or something like that.
Yeah, that happens pretty early on.
It makes like anything buffoonish she does in the rest of the book kind of not, I don't know. Have you read other like chick lit or seen other rom-coms where like you see it and the main character is just dumb?
Yes, the main character is dumb, and you're not.
I
Bridget
won't
Jones
call
is
I won't call
not.
out a book, but like the movie rumor has it. I don't know if you remember that with Jennifer Aniston. Like
Yeah,
the character Jennifer Aniston plays is just a like pitiably stupid person.
Yes, and I do see that some in things that are chick lit, where you
Yeah,
don't like the character is not super relatable. Yeah, like the character isn't super relatable, and I something that I think makes this a good book is that Bridget is a relatable character.
yeah, she has good friends and she's nice to her friends. And she also is a sensible person who has a sense of like integrity about her own behavior and what she expects in life. And she respects herself. And we see it from that first scene. Now she gets involved with Daniel anyway, and she makes some poor choices, but like we know that she's not the kind of nitwit who is like letting herself get steamrolled by like obvious lies and things. She does still go out with Daniel because she thinks
Correct,
that like after standing up for herself, she is like kind of made him think
because
differently.
she stands up for herself a couple times. Like there's another
Mhm.
time that they're about to go out to lunch and they have a bit of an, they have like a bit of a standoff with each other, and so she does kind of feel like he comes around
Yeah,
a little bit. And then
he's also less glamorous in here
well,
than the way Hugh Grant plays him. Like we see like an entire month of him just like sitting inside her apartment watching cricket in the dark.
so what I was gonna say is, so they have all this back and forth. She feels that he comes around. Let's also remember that everyone who speaks to her is consistently talking, all of the adults and stuff, right? All of the older people, even her friends and stuff. The conversation is relationships and not being in one.
She's a 34-year-old woman who wants to be in a relationship, and it would be distressing and consuming to reach 34 like at this time. And like I don't know,
When
I can
this is
see
what
that.
you want.
Yeah, like why can't I, like I want to find someone and I want to be settling down, and I just want some goober that's nice to me. Like I'm not
Right. And Daniel,
her expectations for a partner are not bonkers. Like she's not looking for what's what's that like meme they turned into the song like trust fund 6'3", whatever the thing. She's not
oh, the
looking.
a 6'3" finance guy with blue eyes or something
Yeah,
along
yeah,
those
yeah.
lines. Yeah,
She's not
yeah.
looking for that. She's just looking for someone who's not a fuckwit. Like that's it. Like it's a very like just no
Right.
fuckwits. That treats me nice.
And that's it. Absolutely. And she is looking for that. And I mean, and Daniel, when it comes down to it, I mean, I guess like because of the way he's presented for us, we can see him as a little bit of like, we see him as this like sort of smarmy guy or whatever, right? That's not, we see that he's not the right fit for her because we're meant to see that.
And if we were reading this book
We're
without
so
knowing what
we're
we
sort
know,
of meant to see that there are some things about Wickham that are a little sus, like in the book, right? To use a Gen Z term. Um, there are some things about Wickham that are a little sus when you're in Pride and Prejudice, and we're meant to see that Daniel is that too. But if we were looking at this from a different perspective, Daniel is like good looking and charming. He's got a good job.
he
And
could
let me
also be
tell
the
you
character that
something.
like that makes the turn and becomes he could be the guy that we get a reveal that like there's a thing and he changes, or he could be the person who learns better,
A
right?
hundred, 100%. And there is also, I mean, we can all pretend that some people find their person really young and that's great, or they only date people that are more serious in this, that, and the other. But a lot of times we date the wrong person because they're good looking and they're charming.
He's good
And
looking, he's charming,
sometimes
he's
and
fun.
and sometimes good looking, charming, and fun disguise some other things, or we don't want to see the other things because good looking, charming, and fun are right there in front of us. And those are the first things that we see in somebody, right? So sometimes we have people that are less good looking and they're less social. And maybe it takes a little bit of time to get underneath and find out what their version of fun is so that we see that they're fun and we see that they're charming and we see and that changes how somebody looks for us when we really get to know them, right? But like on a surface level, good looking, charming, and fun are hard things to overlook initially. And that's very human. And again, that's something that makes Bridget very relatable. But like, yes, to your point, again, there's a lot of back and forth. She turns him down a couple times because of,
Mhm.
as Sharon would call it, emotional fuckwittage, right? That's Sharon's term for it.
I can see how this book is the like um the origin, like the seminal. I'm gonna say chick lit. I don't know if it's. I think of books like this as chick lit. I don't think of it as a derogatory term. I'm saying it. but I can see how this is like the seminal chick lit novel, and like some of the ones that we have seen hints are like bad photocop, like a copy of a copy of a copy. Whereas this is
Yes.
like a fully realized novel where like this character is very funny, but she is thoughtful, and like the things she is going through and thinking to herself and putting in her diary are like astute. They're, I don't know, they're carefully considered. They're still kind of funny, and they're realistic. Like she has like thought, like she comes to good conclusions and good ideas about things throughout the course of the novel, and she manages to sound like a real human being, and
Absolutely.
not just a comic character, or not just a woman who needs to be, in distress over her relationship, and like that's the only discerning characteristic about her because it's needed plot wise. Like Bridget is like kind of a fully realized person, and I don't know, I don't know of a book earlier than this that had this same kind of like tone. Jane Austen obviously is Jane Austen.
I think if all books that are considered chick lit were as good as Bridget Jones's Diary and as funny as Bridget Jones's Diary, they would not be categorized as chick lit, or at least that would not be what is considered a little bit of like a derogatory category.
Maybe that's true.
I have read decent I have read things over the years that I thought were decent as chick lit, but I do sort of identify with what you're saying as I don't feel like the characters make great decisions. They're sort of wrapped up in a little bow in a way that at the end I don't personally get a lot out of them. And this, like every time I read it, I just see it as this way of like poking fun at the way that sort of like the world views women. So I'm reading this article in the New York Times about this book called Bridget Jones Deserves Better, and so do the rest of us, or something along those lines. And it's going on about, how she's talking about her weight all of the time, and she's counting her alcohol units, and she's very she's focused on finding a relationship. Everyone around her is focused on her finding a relationship. But for one, I think this book is of the moment.
I
So
think the book
we've
also knows
started
it's
this
doing those things.
100%, 100%. This book is super aware of that. It's
Yeah.
not meant to be like, oh, this is what all women should be. This is what all women are.
No, there's that fantastic scene where she's talking to, is Tom her gay friend? There's
Hmm.
two fellas. There's Simon. Tom is the fellow who
Tom,
got the nose job.
Tom is,
Um,
yeah.
there's that great scene where she's talking to Tom, and he says something about dieting, and the way it transpires is he's like, how many calories, or he names a thing, and she just tells him exactly. And he's like, that's mental. How many calories are in this? And he names another thing, and she goes large or small, and she tells him exactly. And he just keeps naming things, and she keeps telling me, he's like, you're out of your mind. She's like, this has been my life since I was a kid. This is like women's, like, this book knows that this book is not celebrating that. This book is not trying to portray that as something that is an ideal or that should be going on. This book is very aware that that is a sorrowful trait for Bridget or any other woman to have. And I I find think pieces and hot take stuff like that very annoying, because reading comprehension includes things like understanding metaphor and subtext and tone and point of view. And you're supposed to know that, New York Times, whoever wrote that.
Right.
Sorry.
No,
This is
what
my
in
thank
your
you for coming. Thank you for coming to my TED talk in the middle of this podcast.
no, your example dovetails exactly into what I wanted to bring up. And I was trying to remember I had highlighted something from that conversation with Tom that's funny. I'll come back to it.
Like the whole little intro thing about like how much she weighs and like the calories, that whole thing is poking fun at the idea of this, and like, and the way it's done is brilliant. Like it
It
doesn't stop
is.
being funny, it doesn't stop being poignant, and it doesn't stop. It keeps reminding us of this thing all the way down to the very last page where she does the total weight gained and the total weight lost for the year, and it's a single pound.
Exactly. there, there's a quote where she's like, "Oh, I was 128 pounds when I went to bed. I was 100, I was
Yeah.
129 pounds in the middle of the night when I got up and weighed myself, but I was 131 pounds this morning."
Some of the stuff about her guessing what her body must be doing with weight and what it must be doing with fat and what her cells must be doing is some of the funniest parts of the book, as far as I'm concerned.
It
Like
is.
some just random like speculation where she's like, where could it have gone? Like she
Yeah. And she's doing what the internet calls like girl math on like her calorie counts and stuff, or she does like a list of like everything she's eaten and like what diets that it fits in. But like the list of what she's eaten is hilarious. Like it's a bunch of like some of it's
yeah.
healthy food and some of it's like, four chocolate croissants for breakfast.
There's a part that
Um,
I love also where she gets really into smoothies, and then one day the store stops carrying smoothies, and that's it. Smoothies are gone, and she refers to them as she says something like unreliable bastards or something like that, which I think is very funny. Like she found something healthy that because just again, it's like very human. She's so proud of herself for finding something healthy, but the minute it is no longer convenient, she's like, well, that's out. That's
that's
just,
out. That's
and also
terrible.
it's their fault for not carrying it. I can't be bothered.
And again, she's gained 2 pounds, so she's like clearly, it's from all the fruit. Although smoothies are not always healthy for you, it depends on what goes in them. But yes, but I feel like this is, but I mean, I feel like this is also poking fun at like this is what society it expects from women. For one, right? Like this is do you do you think women at this do you think women my age and older are weight obsessed because that we just came out of the womb being like, God, we better not gain any weight? Like, no. That's something that we've discussed this before in this podcast. That's something that's fed to us over the years. Like, well, a lot of women's obsession with weight is because society is obsessed with how much we weigh and what our bodies look like. Women's looks are talked about always, right? Like people see little girls and they're like, your little girl is really cute. They see little boys and it's like, oh, look how clever he is. Look how fast he is at running. Look at this and that, right? And for little girls, it's a lot of times about your looks. Um, and that is forever,
No, and the
I
way she talks about it in this book is clearly meant to point that out.
100, yes, exactly. It is absolutely meant to call that out. But Bridget comments on it that it's like I've been, and I think it's possibly around the conversation with Tom. Um, it's possibly in the conversation with Tom about dieting and knowing all of the calories for things. But she kind of points out of like I've been inundated with pictures my entire life of like beautiful thin women. It's constantly discussed what women look like and how much we weigh. Like why wouldn't I be this way?
Yeah,
Why do you think that's weird, right? Or she's getting ready for her first date with Daniel and she has this whole litany of like everything
I have that more.
she's scratching her naked body for 7 minutes with a stiff brush, wheezing through an aerobics class, cleaned the flat, filled the fridge, plucked my eyebrows, skimmed the papers and the ultimate sex guide, put the washing in and waxed my own legs since it was too late to book an appointment. Ended up kneeling on a towel trying to pull off a wax strip firmly stuck to the back of my calf while watching Newsnight in an effort to drum up some interesting opinions about things. Wise people will say Daniel should like me just as I am, but I'm a child of cosmopolitan culture, have been traumatized by supermodels and too many quizzes, and know that neither my personality nor my body is up to it if left to its own devices. I can't take the pressure. I'm going to cancel and spend the evening eating donuts in a cardigan with an egg on it.
There's another one that I marked where she's talking about a similar routine. And she says, sometimes I wonder what I would be like if left to revert to nature, with a full beard and handlebar mustache on each shin, Dennis Healy eyebrows, face a graveyard of dead skin cells, spots erupting, long curly fingernails, like Struwelpeter, blind as a bat and stupid runt of species, as no contact lenses, flabby body flobbering about. Ugh, ugh, is there any wonder girls have no confidence?
Yes, so like I that is another great example that like this book is super self-aware of what it
Yes.
is. This book is pointing out again sort of like what I guess maybe the insanity of what is sort of thrust upon women by society. in so many ways. And I did find the quote. I did find the quote about Tom. Then again, I just think points out like this book doesn't, this is what it's pointing out, but it's not doing it in this like sort of like didactic, this didactic way. It's not doing it with this like agenda behind it. It's doing it with humor to just sort of point out this ridiculousness. This is for women to read and feel like I'm not the only one, right? Or like, you read this and she's really self-deprecating, but like this is a diary. She doesn't need to present herself differently for her own diary. Sometimes it's just good to get that self-deprecation out about yourself in a healthy place so you can go out into the rest of the world and pretend that like you're not worried about all of this stuff, that you just naturally came out of the house with like hairless legs and you don't, and not a mustache, right? Because if you come out of the house with your hairy legs and your mustache, that's also not great. Like you're going to be punished for that. And then what? And then like, why do you think we're so self-deprecating? Because we're all just trying to hide our mustaches and our hairy legs. Like that's a lot. That's a lot to put on women, you know? So, anyways, she's having this conversation with Tom. This is the quote I was looking for earlier. That you brought up, how many calories in a boiled egg, a banana, large or small, and they go through this whole list. He says, "How do you know all this?" I thought about it. I just do, as one knows one's alphabet or times tables. Okay, 9 8, said Tom. 64. No, 56. 72? What letter comes before J? Quick. P. L, I mean. Tom says I am sick, but I happen to know for a fact that I am normal and no different from everyone else, i.e., Sharon and Jude. Frankly, I'm quite worried about Tom. I think taking part in a beauty contest has started to make him crack under the pressures we women have long been subjected to, and he is becoming insecure, appearance obsessed, and borderline anorexic.
Neither of those letters come before J, by the way.
I know. But that last line of like he's
Yeah.
cracking under the pressures we women have long been subjected to and is becoming insecure, appearance obsessed, and borderline anorexic, which is what we're seeing in her a lot. I mean, which is what we're seeing in her a lot in this book, right? Or it's what she's writing about a lot. It's what it's on her mind a lot. And I do think that's true. And something that I feel like has been a kind of popular with well, like a popular sentiment, I should say, with millennial women for Gen Z is like you guys are really lucky. You've grown up with this like body positivity. You go to the gym to make your butts like bigger. And most women I know have been counting calories since like high school. And girls and I see this younger generation. I see um in this younger generation, I've started to see on TV less. I've noticed like young actresses, they might still be thin and beautiful. I guess that is part of being a famous actress. But like when I go back and look at TV shows from the 90s, especially when I'm looking at things in like the 2000s, these women are grossly thin. Women that are a lot of
Yeah.
are famous. I mean, grossly thin isn't that's not a nice thing to say. I shouldn't point
Gen
it that
Z's
way.
there's
They're
gonna be
inc
fallout from Gen Z having their bodies on display on the internet for people to look at them from the time their parents were posting pictures of them
yeah.
as kids. Like there's gonna be
But when I go back and look at like
their trauma has yet to fully be realized or like mature. Like
surely that's
there's no
I
way
mean
that's
that's
healthy.
no, that's true. That's a good point. And for women, I mean, our appearances and stuff are still picked apart. But if we're talking strictly about weight, I mean, I do go like, um, I'll go. I'm watching a TV show right now that was on the CW, that came out in like the mid 2000s, the 2010s, I guess, and like the women in it are super thin, like super
Are you
thin in a
watching
way.
Charmed?
I'm not watching Charmed.
Are
It's
you watching
Arrow.
Sabrina? No, let me guess. Are you watching? I want to guess shows. Are you watching Sabrina the Teenage Witch?
No,
Are you watching Supernatural?
no, but you're getting closer.
Ooh, am I getting closer because it is a sci-fi show, or am I getting closer because Jared Padalecki or someone is in it?
Jared Padalecki is not in it, and this is a Nick pick actually. I don't know if you're gonna
Mm.
guess it. What is Nick into?
Is it Fringe?
Mm-mm.
No, that was on Fox, I think.
It's
I don't know.
superhero-ish. Arrow, as in the Green Arrow.
Green Arrow?
There was a show on the
Oh, it is the
CW in like
Green
the
Arrow.
2010s. Yes, the show is just called Arrow, but it is the
No.
Green Arrow.
Oh, okay. Kevin Smith wrote some episodes for that. I wouldn't have guessed you were watching Arrow in a million
It,
years.
you know what? It was a Nick pick, and he was kind of like, oh, I want to rewatch it. do you want to? And I was like, I'll start it with you, and if I'm not into it, I'll tell you so you can watch it without me. It, it's a soap opera with a it's a soap opera with a comic book theme to it, and you know that I love primetime soaps. I can't help it.
Um,
Good-looking
I
people, good-looking people with ridiculous problems easily solved in 42 minutes. Sign
You
me
said
up.
the 2000s, which was because otherwise I might have gone with like Xena. I think that came out in the 90s, right?
That's yeah, that's earlier. But
Yeah.
anyway, so yes, so it's I when I go back and look at some of these shows that were popular and would have been popular with people in their teens and 20s for the most part in that time, the I mean the actresses and stuff that I'm seeing, like there's being thin, and then there's being kind of too thin looking at your shoulder bone. Like I can see your shoulder bones and stuff. And that's an incredibly unrealistic ideal to set for women. I mean, there's a time and a place for people that are naturally thin where your body might naturally look like that when you are in your teens and 20s. But if you are not, you know, if you're not if you're not doing what Bridget Jones is doing throughout this book in terms of constantly monitoring your food intake, which or what she's not doing is working out. We don't see her doing that, which is fine. That's no judgment. I'm just saying, or working out all the time. Like your body isn't going to look like that, but like that's what was in place for women to be like, well, this is who is beautiful, and this is who's famous, and this is what I'm supposed to look like, and like that's really damaging.
The Let's talk about Bridget's actual weight.
Let's talk about Bridget's actual
So
weight. We're not given a height for her.
my book is in British, which seems like it should be English, but as we all know, can be a wildly different language. So the weights are in stone. And I gotta tell you, for all my life, I have heard and believed that the metric system is so much easier. The metric system is so much easier. It makes so much more sense. I buy that. And then the Brits go and do their weight in stone. Stone?
I'm not sure that stone
Two
is part of the
stone.
metric
I weigh
system.
8 stone, 8 stone 7. What? Anyhow, a stone is 14 pounds. I had to get the calculator out to do this. Bridget weighs about a buck 30.
So, okay, so
Like she
we're not
fluctuates
given
around a buck 30. Like that's like a super normal amount to weigh
a hundred
for an
percent. So
adult, for
like
a 34-year-old woman. That's also like that's not big.
it's no. So what I'm gonna say, like, okay, so we're not given a height. We don't know how tall she is, but unless she's like 4'10",
Yeah, like
yeah, 130
let's
pounds is
assume that
just
if she
like
was
a
4'10, it would
real
come up.
100%. Unless she is very short, which given the self-deprecation and the things that she
Yeah,
lists about her body
she's
that
not.
she doesn't like,
She is whatever, she's the average height for a British woman.
we would know exactly. We would know if she was short. If she is of average height, which we will assume she is a thin person.
Yeah, no, I kept first of all, I got through like chapters before I was like, at some point she must explain what this is. And then I finally I was like, that's not like if it's an 8 or a 9, it should be like a TH, right? Like eighth or ninth. I couldn't figure out what it was. And finally I had to Google what is the 8ST in Bridget Jones's diary. And I came across a unit of measurement from the British Isles, only in the British Isles, stone, which is not even an even number of pounds. It's 14. It's not like it's 10. It's not 20. It's not even 15. Which is not an even number, I realize, but like, I don't know, like one of those blocky kind of numbers that you can
That
double
you can
easily.
more easily like add
Yeah,
and
and divide
subtract.
easily. It's not like a multiple of 5. It's 14.
It's funny that you said that because I read this book when it came out. I read this book in high school when it came out, as we've discussed. Mom who did not let me rent rated R movies until I was in college to bring home to the house, would basically let me read anything. And so I Bridget Jones's Diary was on the table, and I think
This
um
is a fairly, I mean, I would let my, the sex is all off screen.
the
It's not
sex is
like,
all off screen.
yeah, it's not a
Yeah,
taunt. It's
I
not,
mean,
in
there's
my
really not
opinion,
a
it is
ton in
not a
here.
tawdry book.
It's not really. I mean, there's curse words in it. But that's kind of the extent of it. But I read this book um when I was probably, I don't know, 14 or 15. I think I was in early high school, I think the first time I read this book. And I've read it a bunch throughout the years. It's just kind of like a fun comfort book to me. And it's been it's been an interesting book to read as a teenager, as a 20 something, as a 30 something, and now as a 40 year old. Um, it's been an interesting book to read because I've had different perspectives on it. From being a teenager through being an adult who is now older than Bridget is, is now. And I did have the English version initially. So the book that would be floating around our mother's house right now is the English book. And it took me some time in the book to realize that the 8ST, the 9ST was referring to her weight.
There's a lot of things
I
here
didn't
that
know
I
what
had to
that
look
meant.
up. VG is very good. G is good. There is no key. There's no like little thing
No,
like
there's no
that to
key.
explain what any
And
of this
Google
stuff.
didn't exist when I was in high school, so I also couldn't look it up. So it did take me some time, but then the
Oh, the
book
phrase "happy as a sandboy,"
I
which is a idiom similar to our "happy as a clam." A, a sandboy is not a clam. A sandboy is a man who used to go around dumping sand on the floor of pubs, I guess before they put sawdust on the floor of pubs, whatever it is they were dumping on pub floors in England to keep it clean. That weird thing of like, just dump a bunch of sand down here and make it cleaner, whatever that was going on there. Back in the day when I guess you could spit and take a leak on the floor or whatever was going on. But I guess because they just visited pub after pub after pub after pub, the Sandboy, that's where that I had read a whole blog post on this
I mean,
after
yeah, you go and dump some sand, someone gives you a beer, you go to the next bar, dump some sand, they give you a beer. I guess I'd be happy if I was a
there is
sand boy
apparently
too.
a pub from a Dickens novel called The Happy Sandboy on top of that. That
Oh, look at
um,
that. Look at that little English reference. Thanks, Google.
no, there's a handful of them in here. What is it that she says she's going to eat more of? Hustles.
So what I was going to say is it's funny that you and I were talking about like you have the British version and because that is what I read initially. And then I don't know where the copy
Pulses,
I
by the
have
way, I'm
now.
sorry. Eat more pulses, which I had to look up. Pulses are uh, beans, legumes.
Oh, legumes. I wouldn't have known that.
No, because that's a ridiculous thing to call beans. That's why would you know that?
Well, but legumes is also a weird thing to call beans. Why are you so against the Brits?
I'm not
Um,
against them. I'm
why are you so
angry.
against the Brits? Is it all the colonizing? Um, I love British culture. I'm a bit of an Anglophile. Um, so so what I was going to say is that okay, so the copy I have now, I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure where it came from, but it is the American English copy and not the British English copy. And it's funny that you said that because I remember like looking at these weights whenever I got this copy and being like I could not remember for the life of me if when I was younger, I just didn't know how much like an adult woman would weigh because I was 14.
Well, also the things where
But I
like
remember reading
Gavin,
this
the young guy, calls her squishy,
squashy.
squashy, and Daniel Cleaver makes a couple of comments about how left-handed compliments about how he loves her big bottom that he could park a bike in, whatever things that Daniel Cleaver's saying in here. And it leads one to believe that she's like, I don't know, someone struggling with what could be considered a weight problem. And like, nah, she's like gonna eat like a clean buck 30.
Right. No, I remember reading this, like I said, I guess whenever I got the American English copy and looking at the weights and just being like, why does she think she's fat? Why is this like a thing? But I will say this again, and this is something that so again, if we're going back and looking if we're going back and looking at so I'm going by TV, okay? I'm going by these visual women
I
that
also
we
want to be clear.
see.
When she's above 9 stone, she's a buck 30. Anytime she's 8 stone,
She's in
she's
the
a,
120s,
yeah, yes.
which is a great weight to be for an average height female.
Yeah, like
But
she's
so what I
not.
was going to say is like so if we're going and so if we're okay, let's talk about Kate Moss, okay? Who's a famous supermodel when this book came
Yeah,
out and who's British to boot is Kate Moss, right? She's British.
yeah.
She's British. She's British. Have you
I
seen
don't
Kate
know.
Moss?
I assume she dated Pete Doherty. I can't
Does
imagine
hate
an excuse for
does
that
does
besides being
Kate
British.
Moss does Kate Moss have a voluptuous body to speak of? Could you park a bike on Kate Moss's butt?
No, she's a walking coat rack, but wasn't she also a heroin addict?
Yes.
Yeah, that'll
Heroin,
do.
yes, the heroin
That'll
chic.
take the
So
weight off.
it sure will. So this book is written in the heroin chic 90s
Yeah.
when that's what supermodels look like, when that's what
Oh yeah,
famous women
yeah.
look like. This is in the like we're talking about in the 2000s and the 2010, which would have been my, the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s would have been my more like vulnerable younger years as a woman looking at these women and understanding this is what my body is supposed to look like. So if you're 130, so if someone who is 130 pounds, if you have an ass to speak of, if you have a chest at all to speak of, that's different than what a heroin chic Kate Moss looks like in the 90s, right? Like, so this is what you're being told is hot and sexy, and this is what women should look like. And so if you have the features of femininity, then she's gonna feel like she's fat, right? And this is what men are commenting on, I guess.
So a little bit of like backstory of this novel. This I did not realize. Helen Fielding, who wrote this, was a journalist. She worked in TV some as well, and she wrote an anonymous column in a British newspaper called Bridget Jones' Diary. It appeared with no byline, as though Bridget Jones was a real person, and it was diary entries, many of which are in this book. And it became a phenomenon. Like people loved it. And it was kind of like we've talked about, poking fun a little bit at the singles culture at the time, both what was expected of it, what the people inside of it were like, and what the sort of expectations for a single 30-year-old, living in London in the 90s would be. And she had written another novel about refugee camps. And when she was working on a second one about, what was it that I read? I think it was about it was a class novel, but it was about the Caribbean, class in the Caribbean, something like that. And when the success of these art, these I'm sorry, these diary entries, like this sort of like in the people section of the newspaper became like super popular, her publishers were like, this, make this a novel. And she did. And the hardcover didn't sell super well. The paperback became just a banger immediately. Like as soon as they took the dust jacket off and the cardboard cover and put it just as a regular book that a human being might buy, right to the top. And then she wrote three sequels. Have you read the sequels?
Yeah. So I haven't read all of them. There's Bridget Jones, The Edge of Reason. Then I think there's just like a silly one that was obviously just like a marketing.
There's Bridget Jones' Baby, and then there's Mad About the Boy. Came out maybe
Bridget
4 years
Jones
ago
Baby is
or
the
five
movie.
years ago.
Bridget Jones Baby is the third movie.
Yes, there's a movie for each of them except the fourth one, and the fourth movie is in production right now. Everyone's coming back for it. Colin Firth is coming back. Hugh Grant is coming back. Renee
There's one that's
Zellweger is coming back.
for Mad About the Boy.
Mhm.
Oh, that surprises me. Bridget Jones's Baby was a book too, because I really felt like that movie came out of nowhere.
I got to tell you, having finished this, and the reason I bring it up and the reason I ask is having finished this, I don't want I don't want to read another one. I like I liked Bridget a lot. I wanted Bridget to get with Mr. Darcy, with Mark Darcy, and she does. And I don't want to find out that they have to break up and that Daniel Cleaver has to come back just for the purpose of there being a sequel. And I say that respecting Helen Fielding's need to make a living. I get it. But I don't want to read another one. I like Bridget happy with Mark Darcy. I like
I
her at the end of this year. I like that she found a nice boyfriend who likes her and is a stand-up guy. From everything we learn about him throughout the novel, all of his actions, he's not a crummy person. He seems to like her because she's fun and funny. He likes her for the same reasons she liked Daniel. Like
That's interesting.
she's
Oh yeah,
fun.
that's a good point. Yeah, he does. But she's got a little
Um,
more substance than Daniel.
he likes her for the reasons that her mother takes too far, that her mother waited too long to like act out and like is now behaving badly and irrationally. Like he likes those things about her now, not he doesn't want her to like clamp them down and then explode in her 70s. Like he likes that part of her currently. I don't want to see her go, mess it up with Mark Darcy and like go back to Daniel, or which I'm sure has
They
to
aren't
happen
good. They
because
take the turn. I will legitimately say. So I did not read Bridget Jones's Baby. That somehow escaped me that that was a book first. I thought that I read Bridget Jones's Diary. I read Bridget Jones: The Edge of Reason, which is the sequel, and they also made into a movie. And I read Mad About the Boy, but I don't think that I knew Bridget Jones's Baby was a book. I thought that movie came out of nowhere because if I remember correctly, Mad About the Boy is really sad. And so I remember being
Darcy's
like,
dead.
because Darcy dies. So
Yeah, I don't want to read that either. I don't want
so
Mark Darcy to
I
die.
didn't
I don't want
realize
her.
that I thought that they just didn't want to make Mad About the Boy into a movie because it was sad, and so they made Bridget Jones's Baby because they could make it so utterly ridiculous. I did not realize that was also a book.
I mean, according to Wikipedia,
No,
I did
I just looked it up.
my very deep research on Wikipedia
I
said that
mean,
that's.
into your point, it's a marketing thing because because I read those books because I love this book so much.
Oh, I
But
get it.
Bridget,
I mean,
but but
I have age on my side here, knowing that I read a good thing and that a sequel probably is not. But if they had written a Fight Club 2 back when I was reading Dick Lit all the time,
is
I
that a term? I love that. Is that basically just everything that Polaniuk writes?
if they had written a Fight Club 2, if Chuck Palahniuk had written a Fight Club 2 back when I was reading Dick Lit, I would have read it. I mean, I enjoy that, and I like it was a really fun. I get it. I get why you like read the other ones. Like I'm in my 40s now, and I've read this, and I know it's a good thing, and I know that I don't want to see it. I don't want to see them mess it up. They wrapped this one up so neatly. Who's
They
they?
wrap it up so
Helen
well. It's
Fielding
wrapped up
wrapped
so
this one up
well.
so neatly. I, I'm happy that a positive thing happened to my heroine. Like I like that she got with Mark. Like I liked her and I wanted a good thing to happen for her, and I'm glad that it did. And I don't want to go into another thing where we have to walk back some of the things in there just to like create plot.
Well, yes, exactly. And so something I'll say is like, yeah, like yeah, I've read those books because this is a nostalgic book for me. It was like I said, it was a book I read when I was a teenager. Mom read it and also loved it. We were so excited when the movie came out. Mom and I went on like the opening night that it was at theaters. You know, mom and I
Did
had
you
a
like
big
it when you saw
plan
it?
where we went to dinner and we got popcorn and stuff and went to see the movie. I do. So one thing I will say,
I
um,
think it's a good adaptation.
I think it's a great adaptation. I genuinely love the movie. It is a movie that I love to rewatch. Mom and I loved it when we saw it, and Mom and I are very quick to be like, "This isn't like the book," and so we don't like it. And that is not how I felt walking out of this. It had a great cast. I think that Renee Zellweger was a good cast for Bridget Jones.
The
Um,
absolute balls on her to take that part. I have to say, by the way, just to shout out Renee, like this is a beloved character who was beloved in the newspaper articles or in the like journal entries, like in the paper, was beloved in the novel, and now they're making a movie. And if you
and they
mess
put
it
an
up,
American woman, and they put an American in it instead of a British woman,
oh,
where
already,
they used an entirely British cast. Otherwise, you know,
yeah,
I love that Salman Rushdie is in that movie. Since we're talking about
yeah.
books.
Like if you messed it up, like everyone's going to be furious with you. But like imagine your agent being like, no, it's a iconic character. If you get it wrong, like just like the anger of nations coming down on you. Oh, by the way, they're already going to be annoyed you're American. Do you want it? And she took it. I
And she
was
took it
like,
and she does a
yeah.
great job with it. But like so okay, but so that is
Oh,
a
I would have
movie
been
that
like,
I
call
will
Joanna
watch.
Lumley, get someone else.
But so the Bridget Jones Diary movie is a movie that I will watch over and over, and Bridget Jones's Diary is a book I have read as I've mentioned that I have read countless times since high school. It is a new and it is not a new, but it is an excellent, enjoyable book every time I read it. I have never gone back to reread
Any of the
any
others.
of the other two books, and I also don't I don't need to see Bridget Jones's Baby again.
Mm. All right.
I don't need to see
Um,
Bridget Jones's Baby again. I don't need to see Bridget Jones The Edge of Reason again, but like the original book and movie are ones that I will go back to because this book does like this book is a light fun read. So I'm not trying to put like feminism heaviness on it. This book
no,
is a
it
light
also
this
does the very smart thing of giving comic characters important things to say, funny,
yes,
funnily,
exactly. That's a great
without
way to
like
say it.
dumbing them down, I suppose, if that
Hmm.
makes sense. But like, if you want someone to actually listen to what you're saying, like, let the sort of like the court jester say it. Like, it goes down a little bit smoother. You know what I mean? Like,
Yes, like it this is a light fun read, but I do think it this is a light fun read, but I do think it brings up like I think it brings up a valuable topic. I think this is a great book.
yeah,
I'm going to go against what the New York Times says in their recently written article about how Bridget Jones deserved better. I think that if we are looking at this with a fun and funny eye that we are meant to, we are looking at this at poking fun of the way that society looks at women and what society expects women to be. So like I think that this is a smart book in addition to being funny.
it is a smart
I think
book.
this is a clever and smart book in addition to being funny. And then I think that because
It's a fun book that took its characters seriously and gave them real world like application. I have a fun fact for you, by the way. The Sharon from the book Shazzer
Shazzer.
is based on Helen Fielding's real friend Sharon, who directed the movie.
Oh, fun. That is a fun fact.
There's your trivial fact. Um, the director of the film is the Sharon from the novel, bringing it full circle. And Helen Fielding worked
Nice.
on the screenplay for all
Nice.
of them.
I like that. Yeah, that's really fun.
It becomes less of a credit that she worked on the screenplay for all of them as the movies go on, from what I hear. But
What are you gonna do?
do you want to do quotes?
I do want to do quotes. Before we do that, I did my I always like to pick out the literature that is mentioned, literature or authors that are mentioned in the things that we are reading. And there is a reference to Nick Hornby, who is another British author
He also
in this book.
blurbed this book. He
He
blurbed
did
my
blurb this
copy.
book.
Yep.
And it's a passing quote. I'll read it. It's a passing comment. I'll read it quickly. Tom says football guru Nick Hornby says in his book that men's obsession with football is not vicarious. But I liked that there was a Hornby reference in there, and then as we've already mentioned this, but the book The Famished Road, which she cannot manage to finish throughout the year, it keeps being referenced.
Kafka's Motorbike is the other one that
Oh, Kafka's Motorbike
I don't
is
think that's a
one.
real book though.
I don't think that's a real book. It's in the
They're on the
movie, but
internet.
look it up and let's just make sure.
Yeah, we do.
Because I didn't write that one down because I also didn't I meant to look it up actually and see if it was a real book or not because I know that's the book that they're promoting in the movie as well. It made me wonder if it was supposed to be a play on the Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance because that was a really popular book around this time.
That's what I kind of thought, but now I'm looking at a website that's called Kafka's Motorbike, and I don't know how to. I don't think Kafka's Motorbike is a real book. I'm going to go ahead and just say I don't think it's a.
I don't think that it is either.
But Salman Rushdie also blurbed this book in my copy. Um, and there's a lot of fantastic tie-ins for everyone in this. Just to sum it up, there is both the mentions of Salman Rushdie within the novel itself, and then Salman Rushdie blurbs the novel, and then Salman Rushdie is in the movie version of the novel.
Hmm.
Hugh Grant shows up in the book because of his liaison with the prostitute back in the 90s. And then he plays Daniel Cleaver in the movie. Colin Firth, of course, is mentioned multiple times in the book because Bridget is watching Pride and Prejudice as it airs, the miniseries from the
Hmm.
90s. Um, and then he, of course, reprises his role as Mr. Darcy in the film. Um, just a lot of very London literati and like actors and stuff, like just kind of, I don't know, I guess all patting each other on the back and shaking hands, doing each other's stuff. I mean, it's a sort of incestuous one percenters club, I suppose, in the whole
Yeah.
like circle of this piece of media. But was your birthday one of the dates that got a diary entry? Mine's not.
Mm-mm. No.
No,
I didn't
me
have,
neither.
no, there
No.
wasn't a diary entry for my birthday.
Okay, let's do quotes.
This one's a little long, so I'll set it up. So Bridget's mom comes back from Albufeira, which I think is in Portugal. Um, bright orange and more opinionated than ever. So she's been to church and suddenly realized in a St. Paul on the road to Damascus type blinding flash that the vicar is gay. So she goes on, she says, it's just laziness, darling. They simply can't be bothered to relate to the opposite sex. Look at your Tom. I really think if that boy had anything about him, he'd be going out with you properly instead of all this ridiculous friends nonsense. Mother, I said, Tom has known he was a homosexual since he was 10. Oh, darling, honestly, you know how people get these silly ideas. You can always talk them out of it. Does that mean if I talked to you really persuasively, you'd leave Dad and start an affair with Auntie Audrey? Now you're just being silly, darling, she said. Exactly, Dad joined in. Auntie Audrey looks like a kettle. I think that's hilarious. I love British humor so much. Um, and then there's in the same shortly down the page, he heard Bridget's dad asks, have you noticed anything odd about your mother? And Bridget says, you mean apart from being bright orange?
That's okay. So I had that one marked.
Yeah. So those were just the first of all that old school. First of all, that old school. I mean, I guess you can call it homophobia, or that old school notion about gayness,
That was a very 90s, like
a
that.
very
This is a
90s
very, very real, like way
view, especially
adult. I remember talking at the time about this. If you watch movies and stuff from that time too, this sort of just baffled, confused, I don't get it. And the internet wasn't there. It wasn't on television. It they had kept everyone from talking about it for so long or ever putting it in the open that when it finally did come into the open, there were just wild rumors and suggestion and like fear around because nobody had ever, I don't know, just like bumped into a gay dude in a Walmart, whatever it is, you
right.
know.
But yeah, really just that. Does that mean if I started talking to you really persuasively, you'd leave Dad and start an affair with Auntie Audrey? And his no, Auntie Audrey looks like a kettle, as if that's the only reason. And again, let me point out that is a comment about a woman's body and weight,
Yes.
right? So, so this is, so to that New York Times article, this is what women were dealing with, what women are dealing with consistently. Um, to create this obsession with her weight and her daily weigh-ins and her obsession with, what she's eating.
So this is where her mom has left her father and comes bursting into her flat, um, and runs into Bridget's room to throw down a bunch of like shopping bags. And she says, minutes later, in a fit of mild curiosity, I slobbed after her to see what she was doing. She was sitting in front of the mirror in an expensive-looking coffee-colored bra slip, mascaraing her eyelashes with her mouth wide open. Necessity of open mouth during mascara application, great unexplained mystery of nature. That's one of those things just as a man that I have seen and like have noticed, but I don't know why women do that. Kind of like the rock in the shower. I don't know why the rock is in the shower. I don't know why women have a rock. I don't know what you do with the rock. I don't need to know necessarily, but I've observed the rock and I've observed mouth always open when like something's going on your eye.
Yeah, you have to. It makes, I mean, I do that. I do that, and boyfriends and people have commented, and husbands have commented on it over the years. Ostensibly, it makes your eyes open more. I don't know. I could never put on mascara with my mouth closed.
No one can,
I can't even
apparently.
imagine. I don't know if I've ever tried, and I don't want to. My mouth open has worked for me for years, and that's what I do. But I also noted that because I do know that is a funny phenomenon. I'm not entirely sure that opening your mouth opens your eyes any wider, but nevertheless, it is how I put on mascara. And what's funny is I don't believe anyone ever like showed me how to put on mascara. I mean, maybe that was something I read in like Teen Magazine that was like if you open your mouth, it makes your mascara go on better. Or if it was just something that naturally came from like, well, I have to put this stuff on my eyelashes, better open my mouth. I'm not entirely sure why we all do that. I don't know if it's something that we're passing on to each other or not.
I have another
I
one
don't know
that's
how
not
it
super
started.
funny, but it does tie back. I couldn't find it quickly enough when we were kind of talking about Bridget's. battle with weight and like the, as you mentioned, the sort of now in the mid 2020s, the like way that we look back on this and the way I think the New York Times, it sounds like, was misunderstanding the point of view of the weight in this. But remember when she gets really thin and everyone says she looks bad?
Hmm.
Like she notices people looking at her. So she calls Tom, or I'm sorry, I think Tom calls her and asks if she's like feeling all right after like she'd been out at this party with him. And he says that she didn't seem herself. And she said, "No, I was fine. Did you see how thin I am?" Silence. Tom, I think you looked better before, hon. Now I feel empty and bewildered, as if a rug has been pulled from under my feet. 18 years wasted, 18 years of calorie and fat unit-based arithmetic, 18 years of buying long shirts and jumpers and leaving the room backwards in intimate situations to hide my bottom, millions of cheesecakes and tiramisus, tens of millions of Emmenthal slices left uneaten, 18 years of struggle, sacrifice, and endeavor for what? 18 years, and the result is tired and flat? I feel like a scientist who discovers that his life's work has been a total mistake.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's
Was that the quote you were looking for?
it might have I think that's the quote I was looking for earlier. Yeah, that when she finally achieves what she considers her goal weight, people think, yeah, that she looked better before. Everyone's commenting that she's like not herself. And part of it too, when she goes to that party, she's on um her like inner poise kick. So she's like she's not, she's not drinking, she's not eating things, and she's not being herself, right? Like she's worked so hard to lose this weight. She shows up wanting to show everybody, but to in order to achieve that, she's had to like put all this other stuff aside. And like that's kind of, I think, part of what they're responding to, right? Is like you don't seem like yourself, you don't seem yourself, you look tired. Because she's not out having fun, right? Like how we present ourselves to people and a lot of what people respond to at a surface level is how you're presenting yourself and like a confidence level and your
But also just the
personality.
sorrow of the thing you're pursuing doesn't actually make you look better. Like people, like just all of your friends and everyone just think you looked better before, that you looked healthier before, you look
Right.
unhealthy.
And she's having this realization, yeah, like I've spent all of this time. However, I think it's also something I think is also interesting is that like that is so deeply ingrained in women that her feeling of like, oh, it doesn't matter, doesn't last that long before she's back to weighing herself.
Yeah.
Daniel, so she and Daniel are kind of together and they have their first like relationshipy night together, and she's hiding in the kitchen having a cigarette. Daniel is asleep. Actually, I think he's pretending to be asleep. Completely weird evening. Realize that our entire relationship so far has been based on the idea that one or other of us is supposed to be resisting having sex. Spending an evening together when the idea was that we were supposed to have sex at the end of it was nothing short of bizarre. We sat watching VE Day on television with Daniel's arm uncomfortably round my shoulders as if we were two 14-year-olds in the cinema. It was really digging into the back of my neck, but I didn't feel I could ask him to move it. This is my favorite part. Then, when it was getting impossible to avoid the subject of bedtime any longer, we went all formal in English. Instead of tearing each other's clothes off like beasts, we stood there going, "Do use the bathroom first." And I just like the way she calls out like all formal in English into that. And something I thought that I didn't complete earlier when we were talking about Daniel, and that it's not, it's not like she's some idiot for ending up with him, right? Like he's charming and he's good looking. They kind of go through all of this. It seems like he's going to come around and be a proper
He
boyfriend.
flirts with her.
He
Like he
flirts
comes
with
on
her.
to her. She doesn't like chase him down. She's not like she isn't haranguing him. Like
Right. And
yeah,
he continues to
yeah.
show interest in her, right? Like he continues
Yes.
to sort of pursue her in some vague way.
Well, he's the boss.
Um
He's popular. He's fun. He's funny, and he shows her attention. And he's like good looking, and she's like excited about that, like a normal
and then
person would be.
when she gets what she wants, more or less, when she gets what she wants, from Daniel, it isn't what she wants. It is not what she wants, right? Like it isn't what she thought it was going to be. He's not really that great of a boyfriend, or she's not excited by him, right? Like all he wants to do is watch football, and he makes comments. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He doesn't want to do anything. Like he's kind of boring,
Yes, and he's also
right?
not that smart. He gives her a hard time about
He
not
gives
knowing
her a
about
hard time, and it
Bosnia.
turns out that like
She
he
calls
doesn't
him
know
on it.
anything about Bosnia either. Yeah,
Yes, and
and he's kind of mad about it.
the guy checking them in at the mini break hotel explains to both of them. who the people that she's asking about are in the Bosnian conflict. And then she has to calm Daniel down because he's mad.
because he's mad.
Do you have another quote?
Yes. This one I just thought was interesting because this one I thought was interesting because it is something that I think has like held true or become truer over the years. Um, but I mean, they're talking a little bit more specifically about dating, but Sharon says the whole bloody world's got a commitment problem. It's the 3 minute culture. It's a global attention span deficit. It's typical of men to annex a global trend and turn it into a male device to reject women to make themselves feel clever and us feel stupid. It's nothing but fuckwittage. But what stands out to me is the 3 minute culture, the global attention span deficit, because I think that because the internet and social media have only like magnified that, pretty exponentially.
I have two more. I have this was a cheap laugh, but I just when her parents split up and her father calls her crying because her mother has left him, and her dad says, he says, she wants me to move out for a while. She says, and he collapsed in quiet sobs. And what, Dad? She said, I thought the clitoris was something from Nigel Cole's Lepidoptery collection. I like that. Immediately after that, she says, though heartbroken by my parents' distress, I have to admit a parallel and shameful feeling of smugness over my new role as carer and, though I say it myself, wise counselor. It's so long since I've done anything for anyone else that it is a totally new and heady sensation. This is what has been missing in my life. I'm having fantasies about becoming a Samaritan or a Sunday school teacher, making soup for the homeless, or as my friend Tom suggested, darling mini bruschettas with pesto sauce, or even retraining as a doctor. Maybe going out with a doctor would be better still, both sexually and spiritually fulfilling. That little run is both, I marked it because in the beginning, though heartbroken by my parents' distress, I have to admit a parallel and shameful feeling of smugness over my role as a carer. That's one of those things I was mentioning that's a real thing, like the panic of your parents having, like a real thing adults go through. The panic of your parents having some sort of problem when they're supposed to be the rock in your life, but at the same time, you suddenly get this like feeling that you have things under control if they're asking you for advice. And she admits that it's a little bit like she feels shame about it, but she feels a little bit smug over taking care of her father, over trying to like talk sense into her mother. Followed by followed by the equally like sort of like self-reflective, like it's been a long time since I've done anything for anyone at all. It's a new sensation. This is what my life has been missing. Fantasies about becoming a Samaritan or a Sunday school teacher, making soup for the homeless, and then that turns into mini bruschettas and pesto sauce. The absolutely unrealistic retraining as a doctor, which then pivots to maybe going out with a doctor, would be better still, which then circles back to her selfishly being both sexually and spiritually more fulfilled by that. Um, which is just, I don't know, like that just is in one paragraph, and that's not even the full paragraph, is just sort of the tone and voice of what makes this like such a great and fun read is like that realism met by something a little bit or followed by something a little bit touching, followed by something absurd, followed by like a good kind of strong follow-up joke that like ties it all together.
Yeah, I think that's a hallmark, I think, of this novel. And something, an idea I was like toying with as I was reading this, or is this question is, do we think that Bridget Jones is self-aware?
I think so.
I think so too. I was like kind of playing with it, like when I was playing with it from like the beginning, like from the beginning of the novel when I first, because she's meant to come across as she's messy, right? She's like she's eccentric or whatever. She's kind of messy. She doesn't always get things right. So I was kind of toying with it in the beginning, and then it was like, as I read it all the way through, it was like I do think she's self-aware. I mean, if you can't put this stuff in your diary that is meant for you to read, where can you put it?
I think she's self-aware, and I think that's what makes this book like the OG of this. of this genre that you're I've read some others where like the main character is just a flighty mess who can't get it together, and that's it, period, end of description for like what the character is. And this isn't that. Like I think she's aware that of when she's being petty. I think she's aware of when she's being thoughtful. I think she's aware that she wants someone to be nice to her, that she wants to be nice. Like I think she is, I don't, I think she is a very self-aware character.
And
Like
I think that,
I think she knows she's being kind of funny to herself sometimes in her diary.
yes, I think so too. I think she's meant to be humorous with
Yes, I
herself. I
think
think
she's
that's her
writing.
mechanism for getting through life. I do also think that she's self-aware. I think she's heightening or exacerbating her like her neuroses a little bit and her self-deprecation because this is a diary and this is a place to do that. And I think that's what I took issue with that with what was in the New York Times article is because it's like I mean to your point of just like why aren't I don't think that's how this book was meant to be read because it was like, oh, you know, being cute as an adult woman isn't cute, you know, being neurotic isn't, you know, these aren't the traits we want to play up. And it's like, but this is a diary. We're not describing this woman. She's not being described by some ominous, omnipotent, you know, outside voice. Like if
Also,
you
I don't
can't
think it's
be
playing.
if you
Yeah,
can't be this way to yourself in your diary that's meant for you to like work through things or it's meant for you to bring some humor and some self-perspective and some awareness right into your life and your personality then like where can you do that where are you allowed to do this
I don't think it's playing them up. I think it's very realistic the way people like talk to themselves in their heads. And I don't think as much as the New York Times would maybe like it to be otherwise, it just isn't going to be so. Not because of the times, not because of this generation, not because of the internet, not because of video games, just because that's how people perceive the world and think in their heads.
like
Like
this was
it's
I
just
mean
very realistic.
I read this book again I have read this book as a teenager I've read this book as a girl in college I've read this book in the 20s living in my own big city working in my own office jobs I've read this book in my 30s and I've read this book now married at 40 this might have been this might have been my first relationship read this might have been the first time I've read this book since I was in a committed relationship as it were I've never just like not had respect for this character. I've never not enjoyed it. I've never read this that I didn't relate to something in it, even as a young person. And again, even now that I'm in a very different phase in my life than she is. I think Bridget Jones is just out there trying to do her best, as are we all.
Bridget Jones is a mensch. Leave her alone. That's my she's cool. All right, so you'd recommend. I think it's pretty obvious we'd recommend this.
Yes, I would 100% recommend this book. And then I do not think that you need to continue on and read anything else in the series, but I think
I
you
would also
should.
recommend it. I don't think it feels dated. I don't think it feels
Mm-mm.
out of place. I mean, the Britishisms are Britishisms, but like, it doesn't feel out of time. Like, it doesn't feel the way certain like 2000 to 2004 pieces of media do, where like they were just unfortunately created right around the millennium and the world changed so quickly that they were immediately irrelevant. Like, this still feels like the real world. Like, it feels relevant like to today just as much as it did whenever it came out, I think.
Yes, and you know what's interesting is that I think a natural not maybe not a natural comparison. Well, yeah, I think a little bit of a natural comparison to this is Sex in the City because it did come out around the same time. And something that people say often about Sex in the City that I super agree with is that it feels really dated.
Yeah, I've seen it with
It
the
feels very stuck in the moment and in the time and it does not feel relatable and it doesn't feel like something that that like grew or was like maybe like as aware
It also feels like one of the first copies of a copy of this.
it does feel like it's pulled from this because this came out first. It does feel like it's pulled from
Like,
this, but it doesn't it stays very dated and I don't and while I do, and again we I mean we talked about Bridget goes up in a different time. She's in a different generation. Now, when we're looking at this book now, she's in an older generation. Her parents are in a different generation than who raised you know millennials and Gen Z. But I don't think that this book feels dated. I think a lot of
So
I think a lot of these issues, and I think a lot of these societal views of women and stuff are still really relevant. I think the conversations about them are a little bit different, and then there's a little bit more light on them. But I think that we can credit that to I think we can credit that to books like this and to media like this and to people starting these kinds of conversations. I think this could be a contribution towards the fact that there's more light on this now. So the conversation is different, but the topics are the same.
what are we doing next?
Our next book, so we've been picking on Bret Easton Ellis some on this podcast. But you
It's
know,
kind of common, I think, to some extent, but yes, we do
and
pick
we
on Brandon Ellis a lot.
and we have reasons for that. And I think that some of you maybe agree with those reasons if you've read more than one of his books. However, he started out with less than zero, and it came out to critical acclaim and for good reason. And it is one of his better books. And so we are going to talk about that and say some nice things about Bret Easton Ellis.
I'm excited to do this one. I have read this book several times. I don't know if it would fall into the category of Dicklet.
I've read it. I've read it once, and it's been a little while, so
We'll revisit that
we'll
then
pick
and
that
see
thread
if
up
yeah,
on
we'll
our
see if
next
we're going from
podcast.
Dicklet to Dicklet if we're staying in that camp. All right, so next time, Less Than Zero by Bret Easton Ellis. If you read along with us, um, all right, we'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Follow us on Instagram. Write to us at readingpopclassics@gmail.com. Thank you.
And thanks for listening.